everybody, to Turing's Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm Jonathan Siddharth, founder and CEO of Turing. Turing is a platform that lets you push a button to hire remote engineers from all over the planet. We are a big believer in distributed teams. We think talent is universal, opportunity is not. And I personally think it's companies want to hire the best people in the world, not the best people who happen to live near your office. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Vishal Punwani, who also shares a similar love for distributed teams and building the office of the future. Vishal is founder and CEO of Sophya.world, and I'm going to have Vishal introduce himself. Hi, Vishal, welcome.
Hey, John. Great to be here, and thanks for the intro. Yeah, when you were introducing yourself and talking about your belief about talent around the world, I was like vigorously, violently nodding inside. So yeah, I very much share that same feeling, and our whole team at Sophia does as well. So brief intro. I've always been sort of a lover of technology, probably since I was like 3 years old. Started my first company when I was 10, I think. I was 10, my brother was 11. We did this computer hardware and software business where we'd effectively like go around the neighborhood and dumpster dive for computer parts, and then we would put them back together and like downloaded all sorts of software from IRC, refurbish the computers, and then sell them around the neighborhood and just buy video games with the profit and candy. So it was nothing very useful, but it taught us a lot about, what we could do if we put our minds to it. Fast forward a little bit, I've always been a longtime gamer, so all of this has like a through line of video gaming underneath. That kind of leads into why we founded Sophia as well. But went to medical school, did a part of my emergency medicine training, put that on hold, or at least on part-time, so I could focus fully on Sophia. And that is what is occupying all of my time and attention right now. But I do make a little bit of time to play video games, ideally every day for about 20 minutes. So that's me.
Awesome. And you have such an interesting background. Like you started off, with these entrepreneurial exploits from a very young age, very interested in gaming. Then you went to medical school, and now in a sense, you've kind of come back to entrepreneurship and starting a company which takes a lot of inspiration from gaming. Right? And for people listening, could you tell us a little bit about Sophia, and what problem it solves and why we should use it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we the funny thing is that like in gaming, there's a lot of really fantastic examples of great collaboration, right? So you think about any of the big MMOs, whether it's World of Warcraft or the new Final Fantasy or EverQuest or any of the like Elder Scrolls Online, any of these big ones. One of the things that is common among all of them is that you have to get into groups, i.e. like big guilds, whether it's like hundreds to thousands of people in a guild. You have to execute on missions together. You have to form leadership layers. You have to communicate context and information to your teammates. There's a lot of, you have to figure out like bylaws of your guild as well. And so like, it sounds silly, but there's a lot of like company analogous pieces there. And so during the pandemic, we were like, oh my gosh, we're still in the pandemic, but mid 2020, we were like, oh my gosh, we're using Zoom and Slack, and no disrespect to those two wonderful, great companies, very, very helpful to billions of people. But for us, for our team, we felt, oh my gosh, like, this is my team, and I feel like our culture is slipping. I feel like my bonds to my teammates are getting a little bit frayed. And that was scary to me and my co-founders, because we were building a different software then, because we were like, we're such a culture heavy team, and we believe the best sort of business strategy is a people strategy first, right? If you look after your people and you have wonderful relationships between your teammates, that sort of will transcend the social aspect and return business results. And so we were like, you know what? We actually know that there's a much better way to do this than Zoom and Slack. right? There's a much better socially online way to like bond, connect with our teammates, build culture, get work done. And the reason we felt so strongly about that is because, ironically, of gaming, right? A bunch of my teammates and I, me, our CTO, our head of design, our head of product, like a bunch of us, we actually met playing World of Warcraft. And we became, I know it's silly, that was 17 years ago. And we became best friends, even though we lived on 3 different continents at the time. So it was like, there was no video layer, right? Like it was independent of all these things, but still we had this friendship that endured like almost 2 decades. So we said, what if we took a stab at, transforming our work environment into something more like an MMO? And so we built this hacky MVP, and it completely transformed our team. And so, we've never felt closer as a distributed team. We've never felt more collaborative, more productive. It really has changed the fabric of what our team is. And I would like, after experiencing it, I'm 100% biased. I get that, but I would never, ever, ever go back, because I think it would be literally bad for business. And so I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but to maybe get a little specific, Sophia is a world, right? It's like one world, one community where you can get a private office inside the world, and you get all your video chat, you get your text chat, you get your DMs and your file sharing and your screen sharing and all the different collaborative tools that you might need for your team to be productive. But you also get all of those middle moments covered. So you can see where all your teammates are in your office, or maybe somewhere in the world, right? You can teleport to them or summon them to you, or whatever the case may be. So you can have all the moments that you would miss if you didn't have a physical office. And you get to do that with people distributed all over the world. They don't have to be in your zip code. So I've rambled for a little bit. So, but I hope that answers the question.
No, it did. It did. It's funny, like how you've taken inspiration from games, which have always had this concept of teams and organizations, like organizational sort of behavior in a sense. Like in a lot of these games, you kind of have to make friends with strangers and work together as a team to accomplish common objectives. And it sounds a little bit like a company in some ways. And I love how you've taken inspiration from that. And for me, I remember the first time you told me about Sophia, like you asked me something which I didn't even realize was like a lead up to sort of what Sophia was doing. You asked me what I miss about sort of being in an office, and sort of like now that everyone is fully distributed, like what do you miss? And I shared with you the thing I miss is that I worry that my team is not forming the right relationships with each other. Like I would love if people form meaningful bonds with each other outside of their teams. They make friends at work. They're connected. Too often, like in a fully distributed setting, it can feel like you're just using a bunch of apps like Slack and Zoom, and it's very transactional. It's very meeting centric. And you also don't have a sense of space. Like I look and see a bunch of channels. Like Turing is now 230 people. I don't really see them. I have channel overload on Slack. Like I've decided that, okay, I can only stick to like some 10 channels. A big part of the company feels almost invisible to me at some point, particularly when we're at our scale, like about 250 people. And what I loved about Sophia is that sense of space. I can sort of see the team. I can see our sales team meeting in this room. I can see like maybe our engineering team doing a daily stand-up in another virtual room. I can see a few people sort of hanging out in this virtual cafeteria. It just made it it felt kind of futuristic. Like it reminded me of sort of Ready Player One and sort of the Matrix and a few other sci-fi sort of elements. And it's fascinating. And even the experience of talking to you first, like we switched from Zoom to Sophia, and I was sort of waiting in the lobby. I could sort of walk by and meet a few people before we looked into your video conference, which I thought was very cool. It's very innovative and definitely very interesting as we think about what post-pandemic remote work looks like. Like I always tell people we are entering the golden era of remote work now. I mean, the last year was not really the regular remote work. Like like we're entering the golden era of remote work, and a lot of people are thinking about how the office of the future should look like. And clearly people want this. People want to work from anywhere. They don't want to commute. They don't want to drive on the 101. They want to work from anywhere. A virtual office is the office of the future. And I love like the Sophia take on this. And my question to you is, what have you learned from customers using Sophia? Like anything interesting in terms of the way they've used the product?
Yeah, and I think everything that you just said is like bang on, and it's exactly what we've been seeing and hearing from our customers as well. And so to go back to the first thing that you said about, developing relationships at work, and I think this says this right on our website, but you spend like 80%, 70, 90%, whatever number, like you spend some high percentage of your time at work, right? And like but regardless of whether you're at work or home or play, you're still the same human, right? And you still have the same human needs. So if you think about things in like a Maslowian hierarchy perspective, like you still need that sense of belonging, right? If you're like, oh, I'm going to wait until 5 p.m. and then I'm going to drive for an hour and a half and then I'm going to get my belonging, like that doesn't work, right? That's not like sustainable. That might be a system that like our predecessors set up, but that needs to be like summarily thrown away, right? What people need is like the ability to feel connected and engaged and belonging at all times of the day. And it may sound wishy-washy or it may sound soft, but like that's how you build and give humans the tools they need to be really healthy internally and externally, right? That's like a root problem solver. It's not like a band-aid, like we're going to give you perk X, Y, or Z. It's like a real root problem solver, and that's what people need. And that's important to like the generations that are growing up right now, who, by the way, happen to have grown up with a lot of video games. And so they kind of get it. And when they first see it, they get it, and it makes sense. And so I fundamentally believe the same thing that you believe when we talk about forming real relationships at work. Because if you don't feel like you can't build great relationships at work, then first of all, you're going to have not a great time, right? Wherever it is you work, you're always going to be looking for the next thing. And maybe you can't go to the next thing because you have constraints that make it hard for you to leave. And from a business perspective, if you don't focus on making sure that your team is able to form really deep relationships with each other, right? At least even in the work context, to make sure that they have this like fundamental trust baseline, then guess who's not going to be able to do their greatest work, right? Guess what organization is not going to be able to get the benefit of having really aligned people who trust and care about each other, right? And feel like they can bring so much of themselves to work, right? And tell the truth to themselves and their teammates that they can actually conflict about things that need to be conflicted on so you get to better results, right? All of that is part of what we're building, right? An environment that like 100x is what the physical office can give you, because the physical office can give you space, it can give you spatial as a dimension, it can give you things like that, but it lacks the ability to give you best practice built into the walls, right? So what we do is we look at we have a team of people on the team who look at the best practice research, right? Like most of our team is former or current Harvard people, and so we are very connected up with HBS still, and a lot of what's coming out of HBR and a couple of other publications that we really like that talk about best ways to build organizational health into your office walls in the virtual world in Sophia. Like we want to be able to make that available to everybody, right? And they don't even have to think about it. Their teams are just getting healthier and healthier. So that's like the first thing that you said. And then the second thing that you said about the commute and the work from anywhere mentality, again, 100% on the same page there. To think that the talent that you need for your company happens to, because you're really lucky, live in the same zip code as you or your company, that's like kind of weird.
Yeah.
There's 7.3 billion people on the planet, and
Yeah.
there, like you said at the beginning, opportunity isn't equal. And there's some really smart people from from all over the world, and we have a bunch of them on our team, and they contribute in such a way that I wake up super proud of them every single day. And so, to be able to work with companies like yours and enable companies all over the world to have this experience, to have their team like supercharged because of the talent from all over the world is something that I'm really excited about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Vishal. And speaking of distributed teams, which is one of the things that Sophia makes possible and makes easy. In your experience, I'm sure you've noticed that running a distributed team, managing a distributed team is very different from an in-office centralized team. What would be your number one piece of advice for founders, product leaders, engineering leaders who are building and managing distributed teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just had a conversation this morning with a founder from HLS about this, because they're like many other teams are thinking about the same question. Like, okay, well, I'm about to start a distributed team or have a distributed team, or I'm making the decision, should I go fully back into the office, or should I go hybrid, or should I go fully remote, right?
Yeah.
And if you are thinking about the latter two, then obviously you're thinking about, okay, well, what would be the best way to do it? And like for me, there's three things that I've boiled it down to that are the most important. And like your mileage may vary in terms of how much you want to execute on all of these. There is a baseline, and your mileage may vary on how you actually want to operationalize. But the three important things are like relationships between your teammates. So that's something that you have to have figured out, right? If you want them to not churn as teammates of yours, and if you want them to do their best work. So that's kind of like accepted. You got to do that, right? And that can come in many ways, right? We do that through Sophia, obviously, but there's a couple of other ways you can do that. The second thing is context. So you have to get really, really, really good at providing fantastic context for your team so that they understand like what problems they're being asked to solve, what the overarching goal of the organization is, what your mission is, what your vision is. Like all of that information has to be front and center in a way that doesn't really, the pressure isn't as much there to have that front and center if you're in person, right? It doesn't mean being in person outweighs the benefits of being remote, not by a long shot, but it is one of the things that you need to think about very carefully if and when you go remote, right? So providing context, we do that through like just regular communiques to the team and like a repository where people can read all of the different sort of weekly goals or monthly goals or quarterly goals or whatever, and then all the context around that. And then the third thing is accountability tools. And I don't mean accountability tools as in like in a punitive sense or anything like that. What I mean is like people like the clarity of knowing what they're driving, right? Who they're working with, what the context is around it, and when it's supposed to be done by, right? So that sounds very operational, and it kind of is. We use Asana, which I think is really helpful for that, because you can sort of sketch out your whole quarter or your whole year, and then make sure that everybody's in charge of a different piece of it, and all the communication happens there. So again, to summarize, for us, when we're managing a distributed team, or if anybody's thinking about managing a distributed team, for us, the three things we think the most about are relationships. How do we drive deeper and more meaningful relationships between our teammates? And that includes onboarding any new teammate. And for that, we use Sophia, obviously. The second one is context. How do you make sure that you provide fantastic context so that everybody can be on the same page? Make sure you have the TLDR at the top, and then you can go into deep dives afterwards. That's just something people seem to engage with really well. And the third thing is accountability related tools. And that's purely for people to sort of give themselves clarity on what it is they're working on, with who and when they're supposed to get it done by.
That's super interesting, Vishal. So relationships, context, and accountability as your three pillars sort of to keep in mind. It's fascinating how much of this kind of is not just limited to distributed teams, right? Like it's important for any company to sort of be good at these three things, regardless of whether you're distributed or not. It's almost like being distributed and being remote, like just forces you to be excellent at some of these things that you kind of had to be good at anyways.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm kind of curious. So on the relationships front, how do you use Sophia and other tools to ensure that the right kind of relationships are built? Like, what is your advice for people to solve for relationships in a fully distributed or a hybrid team?
Yeah. So that is a fantastic question. And so the main thing, or one of the biggest things, that if you read the LinkedIn news, or if you read any kind of news or anything like that nowadays, what you hear is like, you know, company leaders are either embracing work from home or work from anywhere forever, but are worried about the water cooler chats and the spontaneous interactions between teammates. And, you know, so that's one segment. And there is evidence. I think there's a research paper, or maybe a bunch of them, that came out not too long ago, that showed that the way that you get true innovation is kind of like contrary to what one might think, where, like, you know, somebody's like under a tree and an apple hits them and then they're just like, you know, off to the races with innovation. But like, actually what happens is that in practice, it's like the mixing of very disparate verticals, right? So like, you've got someone with one skill set and then someone with a completely other skill set or different experiences or whatever, and then they blend their two worlds together and then come out with something like. So if you don't have the opportunity, so for example, if you're using like calendar links and like one form of video chat that doesn't give you that spontaneous ability or spatial where you can see where your teammates are, you risk losing a lot of those sort of serendipitous bump ins, or like um, off calendar meetings, right? I call them the middle moments that happen in any working day, when you have the opportunity to be like, oh, there's like Russ in design, or there's Colton in product, or there's Emma in ops. I'm going to run over to them and have this conversation about this thing that I was thinking of, and then let's see what comes out of it. And so, um, so that's, and to go back to make sure everybody's following the through line here. I was saying that there's two schools of people right now after reading the news, right? One is the people who are thinking about going remote, but saying, oh, we need to solve this problem to make sure that we're retaining the creativity and the innovation that we feel we had in the office. So that's one thing. And then the second group is the people who are like, we're never going back to the we are definitely going back to the office because we don't have tools and we want that social interaction to make sure that we engineer innovation in that way. And so for us, one of the great things is we feel that we have something where both needs can be met, right? Where if all you know is Zoom and Slack, then of course you're going to want to go back to the office, right? If you're like a business leader and you don't, and you see if you like read the writing on the wall and you say, okay, well, yes, my people all want to work from anywhere, and yes, they want to go to Hawaii and Nepal and whatever and work from these countries, but like, oh, what about my company's innovation, right? If all you know is Zoom and Slack, of course you're going to be worried. But if you know that we're, like you said, entering the golden age of remote work, and there's, you know, companies building really wonderful tools to solve that exact problem, right? And to do it in a really elegant way that people like using, like, then you're going to think twice, right? And so that's why we're so passionate about building what we're building, because we love being really close to our teammates, and so we kind of make sure we eat the dog food and vet it first. The second part of your question was around how do we use Sophia to build relationships, and the way that we do that is kind of through everything that I just said, right? So we use a mix of calendaring inside the application, so that people who, so for example, if we have team games a couple times a week, like today's Tuesdays are actually one of our big team games days. People who are inside the world will get a notification that says, hey, games are starting. Do you want to teleport to them? And then you teleport to the games and all your teammates are there and they're running around and you see emojis flying around and you can see who's talking and all that stuff. Even if you're not in a conversation with them, you can see the liveliness of conversations happening like outside of your video tiles, which is interesting. And if you're offline, right, and you're in deep work or you're doing something else, you'll get an email that says, hey, games are starting with your team right now, teleport into the world, right? So, or like, you know, some of the events that we hold, they can be in different parts of the world, like in a different company's office. Like we have a company that is good friends with us, and sometimes they hold events in their office. And if we get invites and it's on our calendar, it'll say, hey, like the happy hour is starting in so and so's office. Do you want to teleport there now? You teleport, you leave your office, you end up in their office, and all their teammates are there, and it's a blast. And so there's a bunch of different ways that we like actively build relationships using Sophia, but there's a bunch of ways that you passively build relationships in Sophia as well. So one of those ways is just by seeing the activity around you, right? One of the drawbacks of using video only is that like you can't really show that much personality, right? If you're like a, let's say there's 20 of us on the screen and there's like a Brady Bunch-esque style of chat happening, like the 18 people who aren't having a conversation, they're just going to be sitting there with their red mics on, and like you can't really tell anything about them or attempt to build a relationship with them. In Sophia, we've totally used a completely much more gamified approach. And so everybody, you get your own avatar. You can customize it to look however you want. We have like, I think we have like 24 million combinations of what you can look like, which is a lot of fun. They made me, our art team made me a Batman outfit, which is kind of cool. I really like Batman. There's my Batman earring right here. And so just by seeing what people are wearing and how people are presenting themselves, you kind of get a glance into like, okay, well, I know a little bit more about this person now. Or by seeing people's activity in the room, are they dancing? Are they dueling people? Are they sending emojis to everybody around? Like you get a sense of like camaraderie with your team, even though you're not in a video call with them, right? Even though they could be across the room, you can wave to them across the room and they can wave back. When I think last time you came in and you and I were in a video meeting together, a couple of my teammates came into our office, right? They didn't interrupt our call, but they came into the office and I was sending them hearts and they were sending me back hugs. And so you can like constantly be doing these little things that add up in terms of building a foundation of trust and relationship. And that's just a small sort of set of examples. But I'd encourage people to obviously come in and take it for a spin themselves.
That sounds great, Vishal. And obviously, one part of it is the software and the tools that you use. In terms of practices in the company, do you have any advice for product engineering leaders, people building companies as distributed teams, in terms of things to do to make sure that people have the right relationships with each other, things you do differently during onboarding, things you do differently on a regular cadence to make sure that the team gels well together?
Totally. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, okay. Because we don't have hours and hours to talk about this, I'm going to try to give you the abridged version. So we take culture very, very seriously. And we think, relationships are at the foundation. Good relationships are at the foundation of a great culture. Because like, I really love, I don't know who said the quote, I think it was Ben Horowitz or something, but someone said, your culture is what happens when you're not, like the founder isn't around. You know what I mean? Like that's what your culture is. And I think that's so apt. And what that means is that not only do you have to have really good standards, but you have to have clear articulated, whether they're principles or virtues or values or your MO of how your company operates. You have to define like what it means to be a, whatever your company name is. We call our people Sophians, right? So what it means to be a Sophian. And so it starts all the way from the selection process all the way through. And then there's a longitudinal sort of growth and development sort of system that we have in place at Sophia. So if we go all the way to the beginning and talk about the hiring, we make sure that we're upfront with all of our candidates. Like, this is who we are. This is what it will be like to work here. And we have documents that articulate this. And then we have a series of meetings with the folks to help them to understand, like, this is not like an easy job. No startup is an easy job. So, there's particular traits that we look for in terms of humility is one of the biggest ones. People smarts is another one, and hunger, right? How much do you how much do you want to succeed, right? And that's on lots of different dimensions. I won't dive into it now, but broadly, how hungry are you? We really focus a lot on discipline in our company, and I talk about it on Twitter and I write about it in our different communiques. Discipline, I think, is really important, and so we make sure that people that we bring in are very disciplined, because if they're very disciplined in a lot of their work, they'll probably be really disciplined in their approach to their friendships and relationships as well. So it starts in selection. We also do a series of these personality tests. They're not really like because we're being overly prescriptive with the results, but it's just to get a sense of like where on the team a person may be best placed. So we actually do 3, which is probably like overkill, but we think each of them serves a very different purpose. And so one helps us to understand, it's like the typical what are they called? MBTI. So I'm an ENTJ, right? And that helps me to know like, okay, I have like the J type. I need to like soften my edges much of the time and like be nice, you know what I mean? And then I'm a very strong E, so I'm like pretty extroverted and blah blah blah. So getting a sense of like that high level personality thing, getting a sense of, we do something called the Working Genius, which is Patrick Lencioni's groups test. He's the guy who wrote the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Really wonderful book, which by the way is part of our hiring as well. That's a mandatory read before people come in. It talks about trust and how important that is, and I won't go into the details, but it's a really important part of our hiring process. And then we do another test called the Predictive Index to understand like how much flexibility do people like. Do you like lots of flexibility? Do you like little flexibility? Do you like do you like to talk through your ideas, or do you like to think about them yourselves? How extroverted or introverted are you? There's a whole bunch of different dimensions. How detail oriented are you? If somebody's like self-described super detail oriented and they like to make sure all T's are crossed, all I's are dotted at all times, they like a rigid structure, like we kind of have a sense of like and then we cross-reference with the things that they actually like, and that helps us to figure out where in the org they may be the happiest. It doesn't mean that's where they'll go. They have to tell us where they want to go, but we will have some suggestions or inclinations about who they might work best with, or who could help cover some of their gaps or whatever. So there's like a really intentional process of how we bring people in, how we build and construct the team. And then throughout our work days, we every other week we have something called a growth club. And what that is, I think we started almost 2 years ago now, where we take a reading, whether it's HBR or First Round Review or some other great publication, and we break it down into its sort of lessons. Every teammate writes a reflection, a preflection on how the article made them reflect on problems that they've faced in their life, or problems that they're facing in work, or things they're thinking about. Just, it could be personal, it could be professional. We always aim to have things be more personal, because we think that if you sort of break down these communication barriers between people, and sort of get people to cozy up to each other in like a really like healthy way, then they're going to do their best work together, because they're developing this baseline of trust, right? And then we get together in little growth squads of 5 or 6 people, so it's nice and intimate. And then we mix those up each quarter, and we reflect on the writing that we read and the writing that we did for about an hour. And so that seems to be a really good way to sort of help people to keep progressing in the personal growth plans that we help them to lay out for themselves through their time at our company. So there's like a whole bunch of things, but that's just a few of them.
I love that. Like, this is super interesting. And so the personality tests that you mentioned 3. Like, is the first like the Myers-Briggs test?
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs Working Genius, and the third was like predictive
index. Predictive index.
And these, so do you use these tests to filter people? Like, okay, this person is not a good match for Sophia. This person is a good match for Sophia. Is it for like an evaluation and vetting, or is it to figure out how to best communicate with this person, how to best put them in a position where they're going to be successful and happy? Is it to optimize sort of the matching algorithm, if you will?
Exactly. It's the second one.
It's the second one? Got it.
Yeah. And none of this is done sort of in a vacuum. There's all of these other considerations are um, thought about and discussed with the candidate, right? And all of this isn't sort of being top down. All the results are shared. All the thinking is open and shared. We say like, hey, these are some of your, like, this is what we think, given what your strengths are and where your tendencies are. Like, we think this would work really well for you over here with these people. What do you think? Right. And this isn't some like, we try not to be like prescriptive and say, oh, you are super high detail oriented, therefore you can only be our company counsel or like a data scientist. You know what I mean? But they're like, but I'm an artist, right? I don't want to do that, So we want to put people in their sweet spot and then just know, okay, well, how can we ensure that we do our part as a company to make sure that they're as successful as possible in that role? And generally, if you get people to sort of vibe on the same wavelength like that, people will feel really, really understood. You know what I mean? And it works really well. One practical example is my co-founder Mark. So I have two co-founders, Emma and Mark is our CTO. And my predictive index type is Maverick, and his predictive index type is Controller. And Controller, super high detail oriented, very rigid in some ways, and you kind of want that in a CTO to some extent. And I used to, and Maverick is more like fast and loose, and you're probably that as well, John. And when I used to bring him ideas, he would always do this thing that I considered like him shutting down the idea or him finding a million ways in which it wouldn't work and all of these things. And that used to frustrate me. And again, I've known this guy. I met him playing World of Warcraft 17 years ago, right? And so it's not even about like how long have you known the person. It's about like how much insight do you have into the workings of the person? And that can happen really quickly. That doesn't require 20 years of knowing someone. And so once I understood he was a controller, I was a Maverick, and there's like particular ways that you can gel together, I understood that and I checked all of these things against, like with him. I had a conversation with him about this, and he was like, yes, that's actually true. And the things that that he said was, I'm not disagreeing at all. Obviously, I want to play devil's advocate and push back and find things so we can build a better idea together, which I completely subscribe to. But his whole take, and I had been taking it wrong this whole time, his whole take was, no, I'm trying to find all the gaps to make sure that we can properly execute on this, because I love this and I want us to push it forward, but I'm trying to break it down to figure out how to make this work, because he's the one who's very, thoughtful in those ways. And that just like changed my whole thinking about these things, because I was like, oh my gosh, like it's not really about like forcing people into positions. Instead, it's about like saying, how do we make sure that different types of people can succeed together when they don't know each other? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some companies do this, which is to having people write almost like an API guide for themselves.
Love
This
it.
is how I am, and sort of sharing their manual. And I like this. These are my pet peeves. This is kind of to have in a meeting, to have a high bandwidth interaction with me. Like this is what I would like, and and which seems somewhat related to sort of the objective of some of these personality assessments, which is to make people kind of more self-aware of how they operate and make people a little more curious of how other people operate, and the understanding that different people operate differently. And
Totally.
we are all working towards the same goal, but we work differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that I think what you just said is the key, right? Like all of this is predicated on a certain amount of self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are highly self-aware, then like, obviously if you're lowly self-aware, you're still going to say you're highly self-aware, because that would be how it works. But if you are truly super self-aware, then I think something like this could work. And then the next step is to say, okay, well, how do we make sure we're all speaking like a standardized language, right? Because I could say like, my favorite thing in the world is like, or to make sure that I'm not sort of using a language that isn't compatible with the language that other people are writing in, so that we can not crosstalk, but instead are actually talking about things on the same level. You know what I mean?
Yep. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, Vishal. So switching topics a little bit, I know one thing that's on top of everyone's mind is fully remote or distributed versus a hybrid setup. Let's call it fully remote versus hybrid. How do you think about fully remote versus hybrid? What is your advice to people sort of thinking through that decision for their companies?
Yeah, I think my company used to believe a lot more in what hybrid could be, but I think our thinking has evolved a little bit now to, and this sounds uh, contentious maybe, but we think that hybrid is a delay tactic, not necessarily used on purpose, but it's like, I haven't made up my mind yet, is what it tells me. Because like, you think about, and I'm going to take the example to the extreme, you think about like Facebook, right? Or Google or Apple, they initially were like, oh, we're going to be returning back to the office. That's what we're going to do. And then all of their, not all, but a bunch of their employees were like, well, actually, I moved like to the other side of the country, and like I bought a house with my husband, and I have like a dog now, and I have a kid. So like, no thanks. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to work from here because, by the way, over the last year and a half, we've launched some of the best things that our company has ever done. We had our most profitable quarter since we began as a company. And so no thanks, right? Facebook just topped $1 trillion today or yesterday or some ridiculous thing like that, right? Apple obviously did that a little while ago, and Google, Google is Google. And so it's really, really tough of an argument for companies to be making to say, hey, we're going to come back to the office. To me, that's like, guys, come on, what are you thinking? You know what I mean? And the employees are feeling that. And so then if we stick with this extreme example, we say, okay, well, these three companies are going to say, okay, well, let's do, I don't know, 3 days a week in the office or 3 days remote, and we'll do the other 2 in the office because we're hybrid, right? Well, that doesn't really work for this person who lives on the other side of the country. That still doesn't work, right? And all the people who are in the office, like, okay, so which teams go in on what days? Like, does the whole design team go in on one day because they need to work together? Or is it like a cross-functional team where it's like one person from each of the cross-functional team needs to go in on the same day, so there still has to be coordination? Or and then given that the office will be 30% capacity on any given day, do you really need that much real estate in Palo Alto, right? Like, what about like the huge campus that you're paying millions and millions and millions of dollars for? Why don't you downsize that, right? And then it's just this positive loop. And while all that's happening on the company side, you have other companies who have engaged fully remote, right? And what they're doing is they're saying, hey, come work with us. We'll pay you a great salary and you can live life on your terms. And that's going to be a competitive advantage in hiring, right? I don't care where you live. I really don't care where you live. And the reason I don't care where you live is because we have great software that bridges the gap between relationships and physical world. So why do we?
When you need to.
That's it.
Meet in person when you need to. Like, it just doesn't have to be the default. Like just meet.
Absolutely.
Do offsite,
I mean,
meetups, meet in person.
That's it. One of my friends, Brandon, said the other day, offsite is the new onsite, right? Or onsite is the new offsite. Yeah, onsite is the new offsite, which is such a cool phrase.
Yes.
And we now have a person who is on staff full time, whose responsibility it is to like book all of these offsites that are the new onsites that are the new offsite.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so anyway, all that to say, I think hybrid is not something that's going to last for very long, and instead it will turn into companies that are allowing people to work from anywhere forever. And then hybrid, really what that will morph into is just hangout spots. Like, I think Basecamp has something like this, where like they have a couple different HQs or little base camps, I guess, in different parts of the US, and teammates who happen to be in the area. There's up to 30 chairs there, and you could go in and co-work together for a day, but that's not the norm by any means. And I think hybrid will not be a norm either.
It's super interesting because this is a topic where I see a bit of a disconnect between people and quote unquote management. Almost every person I speak with and every employee at companies of all stages, if you ask them what they would prefer, Do you want to go back to an office exactly as things were, or work from anywhere plus meet as needed? Predominantly, it's work from anywhere but meet as needed. Like, why would you do anything else? Like, you're wasting 10% of your day just randomly commuting, probably 15, sometimes even 20% if you look at the energy lost in commute and time to
Totally.
ramp up and stuff. It's a no-brainer. I think people, like every person working, like prefers to work from anywhere plus meet as needed. Why is it that you think? But we can sort of sense some top-down management push to get people in the office at least some percentage of the time. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. So, the funny thing is that like a lot will probably be made of this difference, right? But I don't think it's all that complicated. And it's just if people don't have good systems, people who are responsible, accountable for really great sort of like teamwork and team results,
Yeah.
then they're going to be worried and they're going to want to go and swim back to shore and grab the pier,
Yeah.
But it, that's literally all I think it is
Mhm.
that if a team doesn't know that they have options that will speak directly to their concerns,
Mhm.
then they're going to be worried and they're going to want to go back to in person. The managers and the upper sort of executive and leadership layer, like they're not non-humans either. They're humans. They
Yeah.
want to spend time with their families. They want to not miss their kids' first steps. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? They want to be able to walk their dogs. Like I cannot tell you, John,
Mhm.
and I don't actually have proof of this. And I think that there's some like Japanese research that came out that will disprove what I'm saying. But like I feel like my cats are so much happier now that I see them way more often, you know? And so, like, I think any leadership person will derive the same benefits as the employees. It's just a different set of pressures that are on each group. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And if like if the pressures of the employee are to deliver, well, guess what? They can do that anywhere. If
Yeah.
which is why they're like, oh, of course, like 90 whatever percent, of course, no brainer, right? And then the pressures on the leadership layer is a little bit different, but and they just don't yet know that it doesn't have to be Zoom and Slack. No offense again to those companies, but I'm just saying.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's going to be an interesting game theoretic dynamic. So between even like the big five, big 4 or 5 tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, if one of them says, you got to work from our office in Mountain View, you got to, if you live in the city, like shuttle back and forth and do that. And one of them says, no, work from anywhere. If you want to meet, we'll provide travel, lodging to have you meet as needed, but you can work from anywhere. Like who's going to win, right? Like where are people going to work? Like when all things being the same, one company says you can work from anywhere, like move to another part of the US, like have a big house, like higher quality of living, live anywhere you like. You get like 1 to 2 hours of your day back to either contribute to the company or do other things. Like what are people
Totally.
going to choose? Right? Like so it's, I think the genie's kind of left the bottle. Like in the companies that
Well,
adopt this, like will just have a crazy edge with recruiting.
well, and you just think about like, and going back to the whole personality test thing for a second, like you think about the um, profiles of the people who would leave, right, the inflexible company and go to the flexible company
Yeah.
versus the people who would stay. Like the people who would stay are probably the people who are much more rigid, much more structure. And I'm not saying any is good or bad, right? There's no value judgment here. I'm just saying, there's a particular different people like different things, and that's totally fine. And so, you will end up with a much more homogenous company makeup if you are inflexible,
Mhm.
right? If you are flexible, right, you're going to end up with a heterogeneous company makeup. And that, again, we talk about diversity in the boardroom. We talk about diversity up and down foundership, up and down a team. Like the more diverse, the better, right?
Mhm.
The better your business results. And so, yeah, I think that's another reason that's another thing that needs to be very highly considered is who's going to stay in flexible companies.
Yeah. Absolutely, Vishal. And this has been a great chat. And I want to close with one question for you. Besides Sophia, what are some tools that you found to be supremely helpful in running a distributed team, in running a fully remote first company that you would recommend for people building the offices of the future?
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm biased because I know you, but I do have to give Turing a nod here because we've found it to be super helpful. It's easy. We can filter. We can find exactly the skill sets we're looking for. We can book consultations. We get a breakdown of what is the Google level staff equivalent of this person. So there's interesting benchmarking. It just makes it very easy for us, and it's sort of taken engineering recruitment to a different level of my anxiety meter. You know what I mean? And so I will definitely give Turing a nod here. The other one that I think has been super helpful is Asana. And I say this because we've actually been trying to move the company completely off of Slack because I think Slack does a lot of unhealthy things for people's emotional state. Everything seems urgent and things get lost and all that stuff. And I know that was probably the intent behind creating it, but for us, that's not quite working as well. So we think that we can manage communication and tasking through Sophia and Asana. And then we do a lot of our sort of recruiting, searching through Turing. Everything else, I mean, those are our workflow and productivity tools. On the engineering side, our engineering team has their whole suite of tools that they like. Our art team has their whole suite of tools that they like. But from a team-wide set of tools, the two that we use the most are Sophia and Asana. And then the only other team-wide set of things we use are video games. And so we have team-wide tournaments of various video games, but I don't think that's what anybody wants to hear about now.
Sounds good. And we've touched upon video games quite a bit, so we're going to end with a video game recommendation from you. What are you playing these days? You said you play 15, 20 minutes of video games a day.
Yeah. So that it helps me to wake up because I know that if I get out of bed, I get to go play video games. So it's a pretty solid motivator. And then I try to not look at my phone or anything like that until I've played for 15 to probably about 20 to 25 minutes actually. And so the games that I've most recently finished, which were wonderful, one is Persona 5 for PS4. A really good game. It's anyway, it's a really nerdy Japanese RPG. And then the other one that I just finished is Ghost of Tsushima. So it's about the Mongol invasion of Tsushima Island in Japan a little while ago. And it's a beautiful game, one of the prettiest games I've ever seen. And I think one of the things I can justify this with my my wife is, I'm just doing research for Sophia, right? I'm learning right now. And so it seems to be working, so I'm going to stick to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Vishal. That's super interesting. And I think there's something really cool about Sophia. It feels a little bit like Second Life meets The Office in a sense. And I thought what was kind of interesting was this one more level of indirection where you can go into Sophia and play video games inside Sophia. So that's 2 levels removed.
Exactly. Cool. Exactly. We've got a couple of teammates whose sole job it is to build games on the platform. So that helps.
Of games.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. That sounds great. Thank you, Vishal, for joining me on Turing's Distinguished Speaker Series, where we speak with leaders building boundaryless teams and companies that help make building boundaryless teams easier. Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and I'll see you next time.